Hi and welcome to part 2 of my tutorial on modeling a Roman arch in Cinema 4D. In this image here you can see where we left off at the end of part 1 of the tutorial. In part 2 we're going to continue by modeling the gates that go in here and in here. We will start by polymodeling the frame for the gate, and we will then add the door frames. And we will continue by adding some ornamental details using spline modeling, symmetry and instances. We're also going to add these bottom plates here and some pins, and it's a bit difficult to see here, but we're also going to add some basic hinges for the gates. And then we're going to put those gates into place and complete the center structure of the Roman arch. Next we will use some splines that we created in part 1 of the tutorial to create the roof, and then we will create some more splines that we can use to create the top and bottom of the pillars as well as the column for the pillars. We will create instances of these pillars and position them where they need to be. We're also going to create an additional square pillar here, and we'll have to make some minor adjustments to some of the objects to make sure that everything fits together nicely. And once we've done that, we can copy those pillars around and also copy the roof over to the other side to create the final structure of the Roman arch. And this is the model that we will be ending up with. You can download a project folder with an additional project file that we will be using to model the gates. And this project folder will also contain some more reference images because we will need to create some additional profiles for the top and bottom of the pillars as well as for the columns. Like in the previous tutorial, I will use only one plugin, and that is the HB modeling bundle, and we're going to use the HB even distribution scripts and HB solo a lot again. I hope you will enjoy the second part of this tutorial. So let's get started and let's get our hands dirty modeling the final parts for the Roman arch. The next object we'll be creating is the gate. If you open the gate start file, you will find a reference image here in the front view. And the way I'm going to do this is I'll start with a disk that I'm going to set to -Z, and I'm going to remove the disk segments and move that disk up to about here, and I'm going to scale it. Let's see, let's do 176 maybe, and that's a little smaller than the reference image. Bring it up to 177, and I'm also going to increase the rotation segments to 72. We can also use an inner radius here, and 167 looks fine. And we're going to need similar objects here and here, so I'm going to make a copy of this disk, but before I do, I'll rename it to ring 1, and the copy is ring 2. And I'm going to decrease the inner radius to 105 maybe, and the outer radius to 111, and I'm going to move that down a little bit. And adjust the radius here. I think I'm going to keep it like this, and let's make a copy and again decrease the inner radius. Let's do 61 maybe and move that disk down a little bit, and I'll do an outer radius of 66. That looks fine. I'm going to switch these two objects off for now and only deal with ring number 1. I'm going to make this editable, and we can I made the wrong one editable. So ring 1. I'm going to delete the bottom half, and let's go to model mode, and I'm going to move the object axis to the bottom here. And let's go back to point mode, or maybe edge mode, and I'll select these edges and extrude them down and move them to 0. And now I'm going to create this horizontal part of the object, and for this I'm going to use the plane cut tool. I'm in free mode, and what I'll do here is I'll just left click somewhere on this line, hold down shift so I can make a straight cut, and I'll do the same thing down here. And now we can dissolve this edge here and this one, and I'm going to select these 2 edges here. Actually, it's not these 2 edges, it's all of the edges here, and apparently I can't seem to do that, not sure why. So I'm holding down Control and Shift and left click, and I'm also going to select these edges here and run the even distribution script to even out the geometry. And then I'm going to select this edge here, switch to the world coordinate system by hitting W on the keyboard, and I'll extrude this edge over, move it to about here, and then use the polygon pen to weld these points here. And then we can select these 2 edges and use connect points edges, and I'm going to bevel these. Let's do an offset of 6, actually looks fine. We could make this a little bit bigger. It's a bit difficult to see. Let's maybe do 6.2. And I'm going to extrude this edge down and move it to the bottom. Okay, that looks fine. Next, I'm going to switch to polygon mode, select all the polygons, and I'm going to extrude these with caps. And I'll do an offset of maybe 22 here. Select all the polygons just to make sure that they're facing the right direction. Everything's fine, so what we can do is delete the polygons at the bottom. And let's go to model mode, and I'm going to center the axis and use reset position, scale and rotation to put it at the center of the grid. And you can see here that we have these beveled edges, and that's what I'm going to add next. So let's go to edge mode, and I'm going to select these edges here and these ones. Let's go to polygon mode. I'm also going to ring select these polygons and delete them. They won't be seen, so we might as well get rid of them. And let's select these edges here and these ones and the ones here. And we also need all of these edges here. Okay, so let's go ahead and bevel these edges, and I'll do an offset of maybe 3.5. And by the way, I have the mitering switched to uniform here. If I switch that back to default, some of the corners are going to look different. Let me switch that back to uniform. And I think that's looking good. I'm going to even out the geometry a little bit. So grabbing the knife tool, I have visible only switched off here. I'm going to make cuts like this. And let's also fix the center. It seems we have a bit of an issue here. Let's have a look at that. Not sure why that happened. Let's go back a few steps and the reason is it seems I didn't have this edge selected. So let's bevel again with the same offset. Let's see how that turns out, and that does look a little bit better. So let's grab the knife tool again and make our cuts here. And I'm also going to straighten out the geometry at the center and over here. And that means we can dissolve these edges here. And these ones, I just double click on them to select the entire loop. And I'm also going to get rid of these edges here. And let's check the Fong angle. I'll bring this down to 33 just in case, but it should look fine. Let me go to my render settings here. I'm going to switch on ambient occlusion. As a matter of fact, it's already switched on. It doesn't have much of an effect right now because we don't really have a whole lot of geometry here and a whole lot of corners that could give us contact shadows. Okay, so that's looking good. Now let's go ahead and combine the other two rings with the frame. Now first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the rings and make them editable. And I'll use the plane cut tool again. Switch on snapping, and I'm going to snap it to this edge of the gate frame, and I'll make a straight cut here, and that's all we need to do. Let's switch to point mode, and I'm going to delete all of the points here. Let's just optimize, and let's see. So maybe the knife tool didn't make an exact cut. We need to move some of these points around a bit and snap them to the geometry of the frame. And in the top view, I'm going to grab both of these and snap them to this line here. In order to be able to combine these two rings with the frame, we need additional geometry on our frame here. And I'll create that geometry with the knife tool. Visible only is still switched off. I'm going to snap the knife to here and make my cuts like this. And let's check this in the perspective view, because sometimes the knife tool doesn't cut all around the object, but in this case it seems that everything's fine. So let's go ahead and delete these 4 polygons here. And by the way, the depth here is 15 centimeters. And that's a number that we're going to need in a second. Because now I'm going to take these rings, select all the polygons, and I'm going to extrude them with caps with an offset of 15 centimeters. And we can select the polygons here at the bottom and delete them. Then I'm going to select all 3 objects and use connect objects and delete to combine them. And let's just deselect everything and optimize the object. And I'll just put this in a subdivision surface object just to see if we have any geometry that is not connected. But it's deforming all right, so everything seems to be fine. Okay, so that's this part done. And we could also create this closed section here in between. Let's go ahead and switch to edge mode. I'm going to ring select these edges here and use edge cut. Let's do 2 subdivisions, and I think I'll keep the depth as it is. Let's switch to polygon mode, ring select and delete these polygons here. And then we should be able to use close polygon hole to close off these areas here. And I'll just select these 2 n-gons here, and I'm going to remove them. And that's looking good. So there's one more thing to do, and that is these bars, or whatever you call them. And for these we can use a cube as a starting point. And I'll move that up to here, and I'm going to scale it down to here. And that's 4.3. Let's say, let's do even numbers. 4.3. I'll just copy and paste that to the X and Z fields here. Now we also need to scale this a little bit. And I'll have this intersect the geometry. And let's make a copy and drag this up to here and scale it a little bit. And I'm going to make both of these editable. And let's go to edge mode. I'll make a few cuts here using my line cut tool. Let's go ahead and make one here and one here. And I'll make 2 more cuts like this. Let's go ahead and delete the polygons at the top and at the bottom of these objects. We don't need those. And then we can ring select these polygons here and scale them, and make sure to switch off the y-axis. And let's scale these out a little bit, like so. Okay, and that's fine. And next I'll cut the top bar. Ring select these polygons here and scale them. Need to scale these back down a little bit, like so. And then we need 2 more cuts, one here and one here. And let's go ahead and scale these polygons here. Let's switch to model mode and bring up axis center. I'm going to move the axis down on both of these objects. Okay, so next we need to create a number of copies here. Actually, before I do this, one more thing we need to do. These need to be a little bit deeper. So let's select both of the objects here, and I'll do a ring selection like this and connect the edges. And in the top view, I'm going to delete part of the objects. Let's see. Oh, that didn't work because I deleted the polygons at the top and at the bottom. So we need to do a ring selection on the other side as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete the back and select the points at the front, and I'll move these over a little bit to maybe about here. Okay, that looks fine. And now we can put both of these in a symmetry object. And make the symmetry objects editable. And I'm going to delete these edges here again. And let's select the font tags and bring that down to 22. So what I'll do to get all of these copies is I'm going to use a cloner, and I'm going to clone these along a spline. And in order to be able to do that, we need a spline. And what I'll do to get that spline is I'm going to ring select these edges here and connect them. And then I'm going to select these edges here and use edge to spline. Just rename that so things don't get confusing. And let's go ahead and center the axis on this one. And let's go back to edge mode. We also need to select these edges here. Again, use edge to spline. And I'll just dissolve these edges again. And I'm also going to center the axis on the second spline. Okay, so now let's go ahead and put this first object in a cloner. And I'm going to clone along an object, and the object will be spline number 1. And that is not looking so good. We need to make a few adjustments. Let's go to the transform tab and rotate the clones minus 90 degrees. And we also need to rotate them, not this way, but this way. Okay. And let's see, on the object tab we can adjust a few things, like the offset. If I move that around, watch this area here. Can you see how the object makes like this jerky movement? That is because we don't have smooth rotation switched on. If I switch that on and change the offset, you can see we're not getting this abrupt movement when it passes the center here. We have different options down here to distribute the clones. Right now this is set to count and we have 10 copies. We actually need 11. So let's try if that works with the count option. I'll just change the offset and I'll try to line these up with the reference image like this. So 4.5 should be fine. That actually doesn't look too bad. And let's not worry about the fact that this is not matching up perfectly with the reference image. The important thing is that we get our clones arranged the way we want them to be arranged here. And the other important thing is that if you take a look at the second row of objects here, we have one that is in line with this object here, and we have one in between. So that is what I'm concerned about. And also it looks like the clones have been moved up a little bit. Let's just see if we can fix that by unchecking the fix clone option and then moving the clone down a little bit, because we need this to intersect both here at the top and at the bottom. And something like this should be fine. Okay, that's looking good. And that is the first object done. I'll call these bars 01. Now, as far as this object goes, I'm going to try and do exactly the same thing. I'll put it in a cloner. I'm going to clone along an object, and this time the object is spline number 2. And again, we need to change the rotation to -90 and to 90 or -90 on the y-axis. And we need a lot more copies for this, so let's do, 28 is probably too much. I'll just change the offset. And I'll try to match this up with, not with the reference image, but with the clone here. So this is something that could actually work. But we do need one at the center here. I haven't really counted these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Okay, so now we can adjust the offset back. And I'm also going to switch on smooth rotation. And let's try and line this one here at the top up at the center. And I think that looks fine. I'm also going to switch off fix clone and move that down a little bit and have it intersect with the geometry of the frame. And actually that's almost perfect. Let's see. Yeah, this one here is at the center, so I don't really want to change the offset. Let's just do a render and see how that looks. And I think that looks pretty good actually, so I'm going to stick with it. Maybe I'm going to move these points back a little bit again. So let's see, I'm going to select one of the polygon objects here, and I'm going to copy the position, and then I'm going to select these points here and paste that number. And I'll do the same thing for this object here. It seems like I screwed something up. Let me just undo that. What if I switch that cloner off for now? So let's do 5.3 for the position. Same here. And let's move the points on the other side to the corresponding position on the opposite side here. Okay, let's switch those cloners back on. Okay, so I think that's looking fine. So this is bars 2. And you can keep the cloners if you want to. I'll just put these objects here in a null object. This is going to be my backup. And I'm going to drag the cloners out, or a copy of the cloners, and I will make these editable. And I'll just connect all of these objects here. So connect objects and delete. And I'm going to center the axis and put it at the bottom of the object. So this is the gate frame bars. Before we continue and model the door frame, I need to fix a mistake I made on the frame here. And I've already fixed that, but just in case this happened to you too, I wanted to show you what I did wrong. You remember that we beveled these edges here, and when I did that, I accidentally also selected the edges on the outside. And because I did, this area turned out shorter than the one on the other side. Now let me show you what I mean. I'll just ring select these edges here and connect them, and then just select these edges and delete them. So basically that's what happened. And just in case you were following my lead, you may have ended up with the same problem here, and I wanted to show you how we can fix that. First of all, I'm going to switch off snapping here. I'm going to select the edges here on this side, and in the top view I'm going to extrude these and then snap them over to the other side. And I'll switch off snapping, and holding down shift I'm going to double click on one of these edges here, which will select this loop, and then I'll use the stitch and sew tool, hold down shift, left click and drag, and I can close that gap. And now we can select this edge loop here, dissolve these edges, and we can also ring select these polygons and delete them. And there we go. That's that mistake fixed. And just in case, I'm going to optimize. Let's go back to the front view. And now we can continue and model the door frame. If you zoom in a little bit closer, you can see that these elements here apparently are round. And I'm going to do a slightly higher res version of this, which probably is not very reasonable, but it's going to look a little bit better. We have a lot of symmetry here, left to right, and we kind of have a symmetry top to bottom as well. The objects are just a little bit different. These swirly things up here are a little bit bigger than the ones down here, and it's not completely symmetrical, but kind of. For now, we're not going to worry about those rings or those swirly elements here. We're just going to worry about that frame. And as with everything else, you can do this in a number of ways. The easiest way would be to just use some cylinders and have them intersect. And there's no shame in doing that, because you will save quite a few polygons if you do it like that. However, I want to do a version that is a little more advanced. So the idea I came up with to do this is I'm going to start with a plane instead of a cylinder. We're going to use a cylinder eventually, of course, to create the elements of the door frame, but for now I'm going to start with a plane, and I'm going to use that as a helper object that helps me get even distances, for example, and that I can use to snap the objects to. So let's go ahead and create a plane, put it to -z, and I'll get rid of all of the segments here. And I'll just move it over to about the center here and scale it down. Let's do something like this, and I'm going to scale it up like so. And the top edge I'm going to line up approximately with the center of that top bar here. And then we can make this plane editable and go to point mode. And I'll select the points here at the bottom and move these down. And I'll put these here. And it's a bit difficult to see. The door frame continues all the way to the bottom. And we have a horizontal bar here, we have another one here, and we have this plate that sits on top of that bottom area here. Let's just check the points on the side. I'll just select these. And the position of these is actually good. Let's check the other side. I'll move these over a little bit. Again, lining them up with the center of this vertical bar here. And then we can ring select the edges here and use edge cut. And let's see, I'll do 6 subdivisions. So that gives me the distances that I need horizontally. And then we can add 2 cuts here. Let's select these edges and line them up with the center of this horizontal bar here. And we'll do the same thing up here. Let's move these down a little bit to about here. And then I'm going to select all of these and I'll change the height to 21.5. And this area down here is identical to this one. Let's make 2 more cuts and select these edges, scale them to 21.5. and line them up with the reference image. And we also need a cut down here where this horizontal bar is. Okay, so that's our helper object. Now we can add a cylinder and switch on snapping, and I'm going to snap it to this line here and scale it down to about here maybe. And I'll give it an even radius. Let's do 1.5 maybe. And right now we have too many rotation segments. I do want a little bit of resolution, so I'm going to use 12 rotation segments, and that should be fine. Let's go ahead and switch off the caps. We don't need those, and I'll make that cylinder editable. And I'll move it up a little bit to maybe about here. The position is not too important right now. Let's go to point mode. And I'm going to select these points, move them up a little bit, and then use the knife tool. Make sure visible only is switched off, and I'm going to make a cut like this, holding down the shift key. And then we can delete these points here, select these edges and extrude them over and scale them to 0. And I'm going to select all of these, switch on snapping, And I'm going to move these up and snap them to this line here. And let's go ahead and select these edges. I'm going to snap them to this point, quick extrude them, snap them to here, and I'll do this again and again. And down here, I'm going to make a cut snapping to this line on the plane here. And I'll make another cut here. And then we need to extrude out these horizontal bars. And we can snap the knife tool to this line here on the cylinder and hold down Shift again to make a cut like this. And we need another cut here. Same down here. I'll make 2 cuts. And then we can select these polygons here and extrude them out and scale them down. And I'm going to snap them to this line here, and we can delete them. Let's optimize the object. And let's go to edge mode. We need to do a couple more extrusions here. And I'm going to ring select these edges here and the ones here, and use connect points edges and delete the points on the left here. And later we can mirror this over to the other side. Next I'm going to extrude those vertical bars using the same technique. First of all, I'm going to make cuts with the knife tool here. And I'm going to extrude these polygons down. Scale to 0, and let's delete them. And then we need some more cuts down here. And down here. Now we need to extrude these polygons here. Let's go ahead and scale these down. Delete them. And I'll just select all of the edges down here and scale those down to 0. Back to polygon mode, and let's extrude these polygons up. Scale them down, delete them, same here, And then we can select these points here and scale these down to 0. Optimize, and then we can get rid of these edges here by dissolving them. And we still need to extrude some polygons here. And again, I'm going to change the size of these to 0. Optimize, select the edges and delete them. So I'm going to switch that plane off for a second. Let's do a quick render and see how that looks. And you can see, if I get a little bit closer, that we get some pretty nasty creases here. And it's not because we did something wrong, it's because that's just how it is. We could try and change the Phong angle here, but of course we can't bring it down too far because everything's going to look very faceted. So we could try bringing the Phong angle up, and that makes look everything a little bit smoother, but it doesn't really get rid of the problem. So that's one of the disadvantages of doing the object like this. But what we could try and do is we could select these edges here and bevel them. And that's going to increase the polygon count, but I think it's going to make the object look a lot better. And I'm not using any subdivisions. If you want to, you could add more detail, but I really don't want to go that high poly. So if I render this now, you can see the difference between the area here and the one over here. So this looks pretty nice and smooth, and we still have this issue with those weird creases over there. So let's go ahead and add bevels to all of these areas here. And on the borders, we also need to bevel these edges. If we only bevel these ones here, I'll use the same offset, you can see that the edges up here get pushed back, and it doesn't really help the problem. Depending on the camera angle, you can see it a little better. So we need to also select the edges here around the top. And I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, we can't do a Phong break selection of the edges here that we need. Okay. And I guess we could also have used the ring selection tool. That would actually have made selecting these edges a little bit faster, but never mind. So these ones here are already beveled, so let's go ahead and use the bevel tool on those other edges. Hit apply, and hopefully everything worked, and it looks like it did. Let's try and switch the mitering to uniform. Doesn't do anything. So we'll get a triangle here, but I'm not too worried about that. The point is to get, you know, a nice looking object and to get some highlights on those beveled edges without having to use subdivision surfaces. And having these triangles here is something I'm willing to live with in this case. Okay, so that looks good. Let's go to polygon mode. We don't have any n-gons, only quads and triangles. And now we can create the rest of the door frame by using a symmetry object. And before I do, I should move the object axis over to here. So let's use axis center, move the object axis down and all the way over on the, this way on the x-axis. And now we can put this in a symmetry object. Let's go ahead and make this editable. And we can also use a symmetry object to mirror this top to bottom. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just undo that. Select the object, hold down Alt. So I can automatically make it a parent of the cylinder. And we need to change the mirror plane here to XZ. Let's go ahead and make this editable. And then we need to adjust a few things. Let's rename this to door frame. Let's go to edge mode and I'll select these edges here. Let's make the plane visible again. Switch on snapping. And I'm going to move these edges down and snap them to here. And I'm going to move these down to here and these ones to here. We still need that horizontal bar down here, and in order to get that I'll just make two cuts like this, and then I'm going to select these polygons here and I'm going to split these off. So we get this new object here. Let's hide that for a second. And on the original object we can get rid of these edges again by dissolving them. Let's go ahead and I'll just center the axis on this. Let's go ahead and move this down and snap it to this line here. Actually, let's move the object axis to the center line here and then snap it to this line here. And let's select the door frame, go to edge mode, and I'll make two cuts, one here and one here, and I'll just delete the polygons in between here. And then we can select both of these objects, use connect objects and delete, and change the size of these points to 0. Same up here. Let's deselect everything, optimize the object, and in edge mode I'm going to dissolve these edges here. And we can also get rid of the ones at the center. And we have some edges here that we don't need anymore either. And I think we're finished. And now we have a nice and detailed welded door frame. And the next thing we'll do is we'll add the other details. Let's continue and do these swirly objects here. I'm going to switch off the door frame for now. And I'm going to create these using the spline pen tool. And this time we need to set the type to Bezier. And I'm going to left click to create a first point here that has hard interpolation. And then I'm going to drag out a point here. Let's just go ahead and switch back to model mode. And I'll just create a few points where I think I'll need them. Okay, that doesn't look very good right now, but that's fine. So I think that's all the points that I need. And what I'm going to do with this is, let's drag this down. I'm going to put it in a sweep object, and I'll hold down the shift key and add an end side spline to that. And the end side is a little big. Let's bring the radius down to 1.3 to make it consistent with the door frame. And this just helps me to see how the spline actually looks, or how the spline shape actually looks. And now we can go ahead and tweak the points and try to get a nice looking shape here. And in order to tweak the points, I'm going to use the spline pen tool. I'll switch off snapping and grab my spline pen, select all the points, and then we can adjust the tangents. And it's probably also a good idea to switch on the door frame. I'm going to have these objects intersect with the door frame just a little bit to make it look as if they're welded to the door frame. So let's go ahead and maybe move this point over a bit, and we need to adjust the shape here. Let's drag this over, and I'm going to make this tangent a little bit bigger. Maybe drag this one down a little bit. So we may be deviating from the reference image a little bit, but the point is to get this to fit in between the bars of the door frame. Maybe we could move this over a little bit further to about here maybe. And I'm going to drag this point down a little bit and adjust that tangent. Yeah, that's not looking too bad except for this area up here. I'll just try and move this point around a bit. Not sure I'm getting this denser area here. Let me just try and adjust that a little bit. I'll go back a few steps. Let's go ahead and set the spline to uniform, and I'll bring up the number of segments here to maybe 12. So that actually is looking a little bit better. And let's go ahead and move that point over a little bit and maybe do something like this. Yeah, not quite. Going to drag this point down a little bit further maybe and adjust the tangents to get a nice looking shape. And I'll move this one up a little bit further. Let's see how that looks. Still not liking this, because we're getting kind of a crease up here, and I'm not sure why. I'll just move this around, maybe to here. So that's looking a little bit better. let's switch our door frame back on. And it goes too far into the door frame up here. So I'm going to select the points up here. Actually, let's select all of these here. And I'll just move these down a little bit to about here maybe. And I'll move these 2 points over a little bit to about here to get less intersection with the door frame here. Let's check this in the perspective view, and I'll add maybe 2 sides to my inside spline. Okay, so I think that's looking reasonably nice. I think we could even move this point back up a little bit further. Yeah, maybe even a little bit more. Okay, so I think that is looking a little bit better. And maybe let's move this one over a little bit further as well. And do something like this. Okay, and I'll grab the spline pen again, maybe lock the tangent rotation, and I'll adjust this tangent here a little bit. So okay, something like this looks good. So now we need to add the bottom half, and we can mirror the spline that we already have. Let's rename this to, I'll call it swirl, for lack of a better word, and I'll rename this to swirl as well. Now before I mirror that spline, I want to do something else. And what I want to do is I want to create a guide, and I'm going to switch on snapping, and we're going to need guide snap, and I'm also going to switch on polygon snap and make sure that midpoint snap is selected as well. We're going to need that in a second. And then what I'll do is I'll snap the guide to the midpoint of one of these edges here, and then snap it to one of the midpoint of one of these edges here. Let's go back to model mode. Just make sure that it's actually 0 on the y-axis. And then I'm going to copy that spline. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to drag the swirl out of here, and I'm going to move the object axis, and I'm going to snap it to that bottom point here. And then I'm going to put this into a sweep object, and let's just create a new end side as well. I just want to make sure that everything is centered here. So I'm holding down shift, and I'm going to create another end side. Let's give it 8 sides and change the radius to 1.3. Okay, so the end side is not really at the center here. I'm just going to use reset position scale rotation, and using that, when the end side is a child of the sweep object, automatically moves it to the object axis of the parent object. Okay, so now we have everything sitting in the same place basically, and that makes things a little bit easier. So now let's go ahead and make a copy of that swirl object, and I'm going to rotate this 180 degrees this way, and I'm also going to rotate it 180 degrees this way. And then we need to adjust the position of that spline. And of course that's a little bit difficult to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of the swirl objects and use connect objects and delete. And now it's a single spline with 2 separate segments. But we can actually see where the spline meets the bars of the door frame and how far we're going beyond this center line here. And maybe I'll just move that up a little bit further to about here. Let's go to point mode, and I'm going to select these 2 points here, and I'm going to weld them together. And we can get rid of this, I think. But let's wait a second. I think we can get rid of this, yes. Okay, so now we should have something like this. And that's looking good. So I'm going to rename this to swirl and copy that name, and I'm going to rename the sweep object. And then I'm going to put this in a symmetry object. And I'm going to change the object axis of the symmetry object and move it to here. And I'll snap it to the guide and to the center line of this bar here. So we get it mirrored over to here. And then we can put this in another symmetry object and change the mirrored plane. So we're getting our bottom swirls here. And I'm going to use another symmetry object. And for this one, I'm going to move the object axis to the midpoint of one of these edges here. And that should mirror it over to here. Let's just have a look. And I think these bottom points or the bottom part of these swirls intersect with the geometry here a little bit too much. But the thing is, we can't really change the bottom of our original swirl, because if we go to point mode, just switch off snapping and grab these points. If I move these up, okay, or if I move these down, the distances up here change as well. So, well, actually, it looks like we can do that. So I was just worried that that wouldn't work, but it turned out just fine. So maybe we can move these up a little bit further again to about here. Okay, so something like that looks good. And we also need these swirly objects down here, and these ones are a little bit smaller. So I'll call this swirl 01, and I'll rename all of these symmetry objects as well. And I'm going to make a copy of just the sweep object here. And this will be our swirl number 2. And I'm going to move this down. And I'm going to create another guide at the center. Let's switch to model mode. Let me do that again. So guide tool, and I need to snap it to one of these edges here, which for some reason isn't working. Oh, that's because I haven't switched on snapping. Okay, so now that should work a little bit better. Midpoint snap. And now we can select our swirl here and move these points up. So that the object touches the guide down here. And we need to make adjustments to these points up here. And we should be able to get away with just changing the rotation a little bit. Okay, and I think that looks good. Let's just check this in the perspective view. And I think up here they're not intersecting quite as much as they do down here. So maybe let's go ahead and select this point and move it over a little bit. Okay, and I think that is looking a little bit better. So you can go ahead and tweak this some more if you want to, but I'm going to call it a day. And now we just need to do the same thing we did before. Put this in a symmetry object, and I'm going to move the object axis and snap it to the guide and the center line of this bar here. And I'll put it in another symmetry object, and let's change the mirror plane to XZ, and let's use another symmetry object and move the object axis over to the center of one of these lines here. Okay, so that is looking good. So let's go ahead and rename these symmetry objects here. And let's continue and add these rings here. And for these we can use a torus, and we're also going to need our reference plane again. Let's switch off the guides here. And I'm also going to switch everything else back off for now. So let's go ahead and create a torus and put it to -z. And I'm going to take it and snap it to the midpoint of this polygon on our reference plane here. And for the torus, we need to change the pipe radius to 1.3 and then just adjust the radius. Let's switch the door frame back on. And like before, I'm going to have this object intersect with the door frame a little bit. So a ring radius of 8 actually doesn't look too bad. And I guess we could keep that, or if you want to get a more welded kind of look, you can have it intersect with the door frame a little more. So 8.1, I'm going to stick with that. And now what we can do is we can create instances. We can't mirror this because we have an uneven number of rings here. We have 7. So I'll create an instance, and I'm going to move this instance over and snap it to the next polygon, and then we can just hold down the control key, left click and drag to create the other copies here. And let's go ahead and move these down to here. And I'm going to put all of these in a null object. And these are our rings. And I'm going to create an instance of that null object. And I'm going to move that instance down and snap it to the center of this polygon here. So I'm going to switch everything else back on. And I think that's looking pretty nice. So now we can continue and create the rest of the parts for the door. So let's go ahead and model the remaining parts of that gate here. And I'm going to start with the bottom plate. And for this we can use a plane. Let's put it to -z. Remove all of the segments, and I'm going to switch our reference plane back on. and let's rename that to door bottom plate. And I'm going to move it and snap it to the center of this polygon on the reference plane here. And now we can switch that off again, scale our plate down. And let's make it editable. Select the points up here, and oh, I snapped it to the wrong polygon. Never mind. Let's just grab all of these points and move them down to here. And then I'm going to snap these points to the center line of this horizontal bar here. Let's move these points up and snap them to here. And I'm going to move these over, snap them to there. And these points I'm going to snap to the center line on this vertical bar. Let's switch to model mode, and I'll just make sure that the axis is centered. And then I'm going to snap it to this side of the door frame. Let's maybe do that in the top view. We need to snap it to this line, I think. And this is the bottom plate back. Let's make a copy of that. And I'm going to snap it to the other side, which should be this edge here. Okay, that looks fine, and this is the bottom plate front. Let's go to polygon mode and select the polygon, and let's extrude this with caps, and I'll do an offset of -1.5. Let's select all the polygons and reverse the normals, and that's our first plate done. And I'll do the same thing with the plate on the other side. Let's extrude that in the positive direction, 1.5. And if you take a look at the reference image, we also have this part here where this pin goes in. And we could either do this as a separate object, or we could just model it as a part of the plate. And that's what I'm going to do. So let's grab the line cut tool, and I'll make a cut here straight down. Make sure to switch off visible only here. And I'm going to select this edge and position it. It's actually right where I need it to be. So let's go ahead and bevel that. And I'll make the bevel a bit bigger than the object because I want to contain this detail in this area here. And let's go ahead and ring select these edges. I'll use edge cut this time with 2 subdivisions. Hold down Control to slide these edges up a little bit, then hold down Shift to scale them. And actually I'm going to scale them larger than the actual detail, just like I did with the other edges here. So something like this should be fine. Let's go ahead and select both of these loops, and I'm going to move these edges down a little bit. Do something like this and scale them a little bit more in the y-axis. And then we can select this polygon here and use extrude inner and extrude it down like this, and let's give it a width of maybe 7. Scale it up a bit. Let's do 23 for the height. And I'm going to extrude this polygon without caps and using an offset of 7 again. And next I'm going to create that pin, And for that I'm going to use a spline. So let's grab our spline pen tool, switch it to linear, and I'll create a point here. Go to my move tool, switch to point mode. I'm already in point mode, and I can quick extrude this point over and down. And let's go ahead and line these points up like so. And let's move this point down. I'm going to move the axis of this. Actually, it already is at 0 on the Y position, but what I want to do is snap it to the bottom point on that spline. Which for some reason I can't do. Let's go to the perspective view. And I'll just solo the object. Yeah, still not working. Interesting. There's no reason why this shouldn't work. Let's just move the axis down to 0. It's about in the right position. Then go to point mode, and I'm going to select this bottom point and just move it down to 0. Let's switch off the object axis. This point actually needs to go a little bit down because this pin will probably stick into the floor to fix that door here. And now we can select this point here and chamfer it. Like so. Okay, and let's put this into a sweep object. Let's call this door fixing pin. And we need to add a profile spline. I'm going to use an N side. Change the radius to maybe 2. And I'm also going to put it at the center of the sweep object here. And it looks like I haven't moved this point down, which is probably because I forgot to switch off enable axis before. Let's go ahead and move that point down to about here. And let's go back to model mode and unsolo everything. Let's give this 2 more sides. And we also need to move it over a bit and center it on this polygon here. And I'll do that maybe in the top view. Yeah, things are a bit difficult to see. Let's see, let's select our pin and the door plate. I'll just solo these 2 objects. And now let's select the pin and move it over and snap it to the center of this polygon here. And if you want to, you could put a hole through there, or we could also additionally add a little bit of detail to this piece here. I'm going to select these edges and bevel them, and let's do something like this. And let's put a hole in there, because why not? Let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges here. But I'm going to ring select these edges and connect them. And I'm going to ring select these edges and connect them as well. And that's just so I get a connection to the center lines of that round part here. And that means we have a couple more edges. Let's go ahead and count these. 3, 4, 5, and 5 on this side, which means 10. So we need to change the sides to 10 here. And let's go ahead and put that back plate into a bool object and drag a copy of the pin in there. And if I switch that pin off, you can see we're getting our hole through there. So now we can make this bool object editable, but before I do, I'm going to switch on create single object and hide new edges, and I'm going to rename the bool object. So let's make this editable, get rid of the selection tags here, and let's fix all the issues here. Let's maybe start by welding some points here. Let's see, I think these ones I'm going to weld to here, because then we can connect these. And over here, I'll just delete this one and connect these 2 points, these ones and these ones. And I think we don't need these edges here, so let's dissolve these. And connect these points and these points. So that leaves these 2 edges here. And what I'll do here is I'll dissolve this edge, and before I continue up there, I'm going to clean up the bottom as well, same way as before. Oh, we might as well just delete these points here. Okay, and let's connect these 2 and these 2. And I'm going to weld these 2 here and connect these points. And weld these 2. And then I'm going to ring select the edges here and deselect this one and this one, and then we can use edge cut with 2 subdivisions, and this will fix the geometry here. So let's go ahead and switch that pin back on. Okay, and that's looking good. Let's unhide everything. And for that pin, we could use some caps if we wanted to. Let's go ahead and do that. Switch that to fillet and use the constrain option. And we need to bring that radius down quite a bit. And let's do maybe 1 or 0.5, just to get a bit of a bevel on there. And I'm going to switch that to n-gons. Okay, so that's the bottom area done. What we still need is the hinges over here on the left. And these are basically square or rectangular with 1 round end. So I think what I'll do here is I'll start with a disc, put it to -z for now, get rid of the segments, and I'm going to move it up to, let's just switch on snapping, and I'll move it to here. And I'm going to scale it down. And I'll make the radius slightly smaller than the one we used for the bars. So I'll do maybe 1.3 or 1.4. Let's try 1.3, and I'll give it 24 segments. And I'm going to set it back to +Y and move it up a little bit. And we need to move it over a little bit. Something like this. And let's make this editable. Let's go to the top view and delete 1/2. And let's select these two edges here and extrude them back. And I think I'll just have this penetrate the geometry. You can put it exactly on the door frame if you want to, but I'll just move it inside a little bit. Let's go to polygon mode, select all the polygons, and I'm going to extrude this down with caps to about here. And we need to reverse the normals, and let's give it a height of 8. And we need 3 of these. One will be fixed to the door frame, the other 2 will be fixed to the gate frame. So let's go ahead and make a copy, and I'll center the object axis on both of them. Actually, no, I'm not. Let's wait a little bit with that. Let's just make a copy and drag that down to here. And we need another copy in between these two. Let's put it to about here and rotate it 180 degrees. And this one is supposed to stick inside of the door frame. So I'm going to select the edges or points here and just move them inside the object like this. Okay, and then we need a pin to fix all these pieces here. And for that I'm going to use a cylinder. And I'm going to move it and snap it to here. And let's make this a child of the first disk, and I'm going to use reset position scale rotation so it sits exactly at the center of the round area here. Let's go ahead and change the radius of this. Let's give it a radius of 1 maybe. Yeah, that looks about right. And if you want to, you can use another bool object and create holes. But I don't really want to do that because it's such a small detail. It's probably not worth the effort. And let's give this maybe 12 rotation segments, should be enough. And we also need to change the height a little bit. And we also need to move it down. So let's do maybe something like this. And I'm going to make it editable and optimize to weld the caps to the rotation segments. And I'm going to move these points up a little bit to maybe about here. And if you want to, you can give it an even number for the height. Let's do 28. And I'm going to bevel the top and bottom edges just to add a bit of detail. And that's not working so well. Let's see what's going on. I'll just undo that. Of course, we should only select the edges on the outside. Okay. So now let's add a bevel. Let's do something like this. So this is our door hinge top, and actually let's call this gate frame, because this one needs to be connected to the gate frame. I'm not going to set these up so I can actually rotate them, but if you want to, it's probably a good idea to give them proper names and know which part is which. So gate frame hinge top, this one is the gate frame hinge bottom, and this is the door hinge, and this is the door hinge pin. So these two objects, if you want to have a door that rotates, these two need to go into the null object with a door. But for now, I'm going to group all of them and call this hinge for now. And I'll make a copy, or should we do instances? Doesn't really matter. And I'm going to move this down. Let's see, where's the next one? There's one down here. And there's a third one here. So let's copy that first hinge and put it to here. And I think that looks good. Now, like I said, I don't intend to rotate that door, but just in case you do, call this hinge 1, hinge 2, and hinge 3. And let's see, let's split these objects up and let's set everything up so we could rotate the door if we wanted to. So what I'll do is I need to remove the door hinge and the door pins. And I'll group these objects here and call these gate frame hinge parts, and I'll group these ones and call them door frame hinge parts. And I think that's pretty much it. Now we need to organize everything a little bit and put everything into null objects here. And I'll use the door frame hinge parts because the object axis is right where we need it to be if we want to rotate the door. So I'm going to put this in a null object, which is going to be the door parts, and I'm going to put everything that belongs to the door in there. So the door fixing pin, the top and bottom plates, and the rings. And what else? The swirls and the door frame. Okay. And the rest of these, let's put the rings in there too. And the rest of these parts is the gate frame parts. So this is the object that we can rotate if we want to. And this one is fixed. And it contains the hinges that are fixed to the gate frame. And now we can put both of these objects in a null object. So hit Alt-G. And I'll center the object axis at the bottom. We need to check include children and use all objects. And I don't really want to move the object axis to this position. Well, actually, that is fine. We'll call this gate. And as for the door parts, we need to put those in another null object. No, we don't. We only need to put it in a symmetry object. So let's go ahead and use a symmetry object. And I'm going to move the object axis of the symmetry object. And we need to move it to the center. Let me undo that. And just drag this down. And I'm going to snap this to the center on this edge here, which will mirror it over to the other side. So we get our second door here. And of course, if you want to open these doors and you want a different rotation for the doors, you can't really use a symmetry object. I'm also going to use a symmetry object to mirror this over to the other side of the Roman arch. So these are the door parts, and this is the gate. And let's go ahead and copy that gate, and I'm going to paste it to my Roman arch file. And let's move this over. We need to rotate it 90 degrees. And let's go ahead and move this back inside to about here. And if you rotate this, you can see that our gate doesn't quite fit into this arch here. So we need to improvise a little bit, and let's try and fix this by doing something simple. Let me just check the perspective view. So everything's looking fine here. It's sticking a little bit into our center structure here, which is fine. And I think the easiest way to get everything matching up is just to move this arch on the center structure down a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that. Select the side walls and grab all of these points. And I'll just move these down and have them intersect the top of the gate a little bit. So something like this. And I'll move the gate over just a little bit further, maybe to here. Okay, and I think that's looking good. Let's put the gate into a symmetry object. I'll call this gate, and I'll reset the axis of the symmetry object to 0, and then I'm going to move the object axis of the symmetry object over to 0 on the x-axis, and that should mirror our gate over to the other side. I just adjust the position a little bit. Let's go back, switch off enable axis, and I'll move this over just a little bit further. And just checking the other side again. I'm just checking again because I wasn't really sure if these are actually positioned correctly, but they are, so everything's good. So this is the finished center structure, and now we can go ahead and model the rest of this Roman arch, and we're going to continue with the roof on the side. Let's open the Roman arch profile splines file. We need to create a couple more profiles. I'll just delete this extrude here and hide that spline. And I've prepared a couple of additional reference images that we need to create these profiles. You will find them in the text folder of the project file you can download. I'll just drag in the reference images from my Windows Explorer here, and what we need is the pillar top profile, the pillar profile, and the pillar base profile. Let's start with the top and drag this into our front view here. Make sure everything's deselected and grab the spline pen tool. I'm going to create a linear spline first, and I'll put a first point here and then quick extrude that point to create the shape. And I'll just adjust the position of some of these points here. And I'm going to set this one to soft interpolation. And create that curve here. And we can get rid of the small tangent by zeroing out these numbers here. And that's our first profile done. So this is the pillar top profile. I'm going to hide that. And next I'm going to do the pillar base profile. Deselect everything. And let's grab the spline pen again. I'll create my first point here. And then quick extrude this over. Adjust the position. And I'm going to create the rest of the points by quick extruding. And adjusting the points. And there's no round areas on this one, so this is finished, and that is the pillar base profile. And the last one we need is the pillar profile. So let's drag that in here. And create that shape. Okay, so that is the basic shape, and now we need to add these rounded areas. I'm going to set these points here to soft interpolation. And start adjusting the shape. And I'm getting rid of the small tangent here. Let's just make this smaller before we delete it. I'm going to switch off the axis, and I'll try to grab that tangent here. Just rotate this around a little bit. Let's go ahead and switch these points to soft interpolation. And I'm going to delete this tangent here. So that is our pillar profile. Let's switch the object axis back on. That is Alt-D, by the way. You can hide the axis by hitting Alt-D and switching it back on by hitting Alt-D. And I'm going to move the axis to the bottom here. Let's go ahead and save that file. And I'm going to hide that. And then I'm going to copy the 5 splines that I need, which are the splines for the pillars and for the roof. And I'm going to copy them and go to my Roman arch file. And I'm going to paste them. And maybe let's move these over to here. And the next object I'll do is the roof. Before we continue, we need to replace the reference images with some new ones, and I've prepared those for you, and we can load them into our top, front and left views. And the reference images we need are top 2, side 2 and front 2. We're going to start with the roof. I'm going to add a rectangle spline, and I'll just move it over to here and scale it up to about here. And then I'll make it editable. Go to point mode, select these points and move them over to here. This is our roof spline. I'm going to uncheck close spline so we get an open spline at this end here. And let's go ahead and move these points back a little bit. I do want them to intersect with the side walls here. So something like this should be fine. And we also need to move this up a little bit to here, and it looks like the spline is a little bit small, and I think that's because the reference image in the top view is not accurate or is a little bit too small. Let's go ahead and go to point mode. I'll select all the points and scale them to, let's see, I'll just switch off the center structure. Let's put the gate into our null object here. So we need to scale these to about here. Okay. And in the front view, I'm going to move these points over to here. And let's go to the viewport settings by hitting Shift V. I'll just increase the size of that reference image a little bit to match it up with our object here. Okay, so something like this should be fine. Next we need our side roof spline. Like in the previous part of this tutorial, I'm going to subdivide points and set them to hard interpolation. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to undock this menu here, and I'm going to subdivide this twice, and I think I'm going to chamfer this point here, select these two, weld them to this one, and I'll adjust the shape a little bit to get a nice looking curve here. And I'm going to subdivide these points and these ones. And I'll continue down here. Okay, so let's select all the points and set them to hard interpolation. I'm also going to switch off close spline, and I'll get rid of these 2 points. And I'm going to move the object axis to the top here. Switch off the object axis, and I'm going to snap the spline to the roof spline. Not sure why. Okay, so here it's working. Let's switch off snapping and scale that spline down. Make sure to switch on all of the axes here. And we need to scale it to here. And I'm going to move it over and try and snap it to the roof spline, which again doesn't seem to work. Maybe I don't have spline snap switched on. Yeah, we need to switch spline snap on. So that's why. So now we can snap it to this point on the roof spline here. Let's go ahead and rotate this 90 degrees. I'm going to reset the axis. And let me just check this in the top view. Okay, everything's fine. So now we can put this in a sweep object. Let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to add the roof spline as the second child. And you can see this looks a bit weird. And also we have some geometry that we could get rid of. Let's switch off the sweep object for now. I'm going to select my side roof spline and let me just check. Now the distances between the edges here are pretty even. If you remember, in the previous part of this tutorial I used the HB even distribution script to even out the geometry. I don't think that is necessary here for this spline, so let's just switch that sweep back on. We need to fix this because obviously this doesn't look good, and the reason is because of the rotation of our profile spline. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'm switching to model mode and I'm going to enable the axis. Make sure that your side roof spline is selected, and then I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees this way, and let's see, 180 this way. That doesn't look right. Let's undo that, and I'll just rotate it around this axis here 180, and then rotate it 180 this way. So that's looking good. I'm going to rename the sweep object to side roof, and I'll keep a backup copy. And I'm going to make the sweep editable. And let me just check the geometry here. Maybe we can get rid of some of the edges here. I'm going to double click on this one to select the loop and just get rid of these edges here, maybe of these ones down here. It looks like we need to bring that Phong angle up a bit. Or we could also try and select the edges and unbreak the Phong shading, see if that helps. Yeah, that's looking a little bit better. Unlike in part 1, I didn't even out the geometry. But I think I want to do that for at least some of the areas here, like this one. And let's see, I think we have a similar area down here. We could definitely even out these ones. And these ones. So let's check that again. This one's okay. Let's also grab these edges here. And these ones here are fine. So I'm going to run the even distribution script. And then I need to do this on the other corners as well. So there's a couple more edges I need to select over here. Okay, so I'm going to run my even distribution script, and it does help to make those curves look a little bit nicer. And of course I should have done that like I did in the previous part of this tutorial. So it was a little bit of work now, but everything's just going to look a little bit nicer. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to close off the top and the bottom, and I'll do this by selecting an edge or the top edge up here and the bottom edge down here, and I'm going to extrude these over, and then I'll try and snap these edges to the other side. And we need to do this one at a time, so let's select this top edge, switch on snapping, and move it over and snap it to here. And I'm going to grab that bottom edge and snap it over to here. And it looks like this worked just fine. So I'm going to deselect everything and optimize the object. And let's see if we can bring that Phong angle down to 33 without messing up the shape. Okay, that does look alright. Now I also want to add a little bit of detail on the ceiling down here, and in order to do that I'm going to ring select these edges and connect them. And then before I do anything else, I'm going to add a cube, and I'm going to put it over here and scale it down to the size of this top of the pillar here. So let's do something like this, and I'm going to move this over to here. And let's scale it down a little bit. So something like this is fine. I just need to do this roughly. And I'm putting this cube here on this edge because the pillars will line up with the edge of that roof here. So now we've got our helper object here, and I can select that side roof, and I'm going to select these edges here and bevel them to about here, and I'm going to use one subdivision, and then I'm going to select the polygons. First of all, let's select all of them and reverse the normals, and then I'm going to select these two down here and use extrude inner and do something like this. Let's switch off preserve groups, and I'm also going to switch on that center structure. Okay, and I think that is fine. Maybe I'll make these a little bit bigger, do something like this. And I'll move these edges forward a little bit. Okay, something like this should be fine. And we can delete these two polygons here. Go to edge mode and loop select these edges here, and I'm going to split these off. Let's go ahead and switch off that side roof and that cube. And we have 10 points here, but we should only have 8. So let's check where these overlapping points are. We have 2 here. I'm going to use the live selection because I have only select visible elements switched on by default for this, and I'm going to select 1 point here and delete it. And it looks like we have 2 more points over here. So I'm going to select 1 and delete that, and let's go ahead and close that spline. And I want to check that side roof because I'm wondering why we got those overlapping points here, but it seems that everything's fine on the side roof. Okay. So let's switch that off again. So these are our path splines for the detail on the ceiling, and our profile for that detail is the side roof inset spline. Now with this spline selected, I'm going to do the same thing I did for all of the other splines. I'm going to use subdivide and then turn points into hard interpolation. And I'm going to set all of the points to hard interpolation, and this time I'll just use an extrude object like I did in the first part of the tutorial. And I'll make this editable, and then I'm going to even out the geometry using the even distribution script. Okay, and then I'm going to select these edges here, and I'm going to split them off. Which means we can get rid of these two splines here. And I'm going to move the object axis to the bottom point here. And I think I accidentally deleted the splines. Let's just copy this object here and go back a few steps and delete these two objects and paste our modified spline back into the scene here. Okay. And this is a little too big, but we don't really have a reference regarding the height of that detail on the ceiling. So what I'll do is I'll just scale this spline down and give it a height of about 45 centimeters. Okay, and then I'm going to move it up and snap it to my other spline here, and we need to rotate this minus 90 degrees. I'm going to reset the axis. And then I'm going to switch everything else back off. And let's see, for this spline here, I'm going to center the axis. And let's put our profile into a sweep object and add our path spline here. And you can see this doesn't look right, so we need again to rotate the object axis of our profile spline. Make sure you're in model mode, switch on enable axis and grab the rotate tool. And I honestly never can tell which way to rotate these splines. I'm going to try and do 90 degrees this way, and actually this looks like that's all we need to do here. Let's go ahead and change the Phong angle to 33. I'm going to switch that side roof back on, and well, right now this is sticking through the side roof here. I think all we need to do is grab that sweep object and move it up plus 45. This is not really matching and fitting inside of that hole here, so I think we still need to rotate our profile spline. Let's try 180 this way and 180 this way. Yeah, that's not it. I'll just undo that and go back to where this profile is sticking through the roof here. Let's try and rotate our spline 180 degrees this way. And it looks like I did it right this time. Let's do a render here. Yeah, this looks good. So I'm going to rename the sweep object to side roof inset. And I'll keep a backup copy of this. And I'm going to make this one editable. And I'll combine these two objects using connect objects and delete. Let's go ahead and center the axis. Let's check the Phong angle. 33 should be fine. And if we go to one of the component modes, we should now be able to close the two holes here, like so. Let's do a render. And that is looking good. Okay, so that is the side roof done. We can now move on and model the pillars. We're going to start modeling the pillars by creating the top of those pillars. And we can use the cube we added to the scene before as a helper object, as a general guide for the measurements. So let's say we want to do 117 by 117. Let's go to the front view, and we could use this to create our path spline, or we could just add a rectangle spline. I'm going to make it a child of the cube and use reset position scale rotation to put it at the center of that cube. And I'm just going to drag this out and change the size to 117 by 117. Okay, and we can get rid of this cube now, and let's put this rectangle to XZ, and I'm going to move it up and snap it to the bottom of our roof here. Now let's select our profile spline, and let's see, we have one round area down here, and we have this area, and I think I'll just chamfer this point, and then I'm going to weld these two and adjust that tangent a little bit to get a nice looking curve going here. So maybe we should make this point here, or set this point to soft interpolation as well. Let's see. Maybe I'll just do that. It already is set to soft interpolation, so let's do something like this. Adjust this tangent again a little bit, so this looks nice. So let's go ahead and select these points and subdivide them. I'll do 5 points here, that should be enough. And down here I'm going to subdivide maybe 3 times and select all the points, set them to hard interpolation and extrude the object. We also need to close that spline. And I'll make the extrude object editable and then just even out the geometry like I did before. And then we can select these splines here and use mesh commands edge to spline to get our profile spline. And I'm going to move the object axis to this point here for now. And then I'm going to snap it to the profile spline. Let's just hide that side roof for a second. So I'll snap it to this corner here, and let's go ahead and scale it down until it matches up with the reference image. So something like this looks good. And then what I'll do is I'll move the object axis again to this top point and snap the spline to here. And maybe we could make this a little bit smaller. Let's just scale it. It's a bit difficult to see really because the image is a little blurry. And let's just go ahead and move that spline and snap it to the corner again. Okay, so let's put this in a sweep object and add the rectangle. And that should actually be fine. Let's change the Phong angle to 33. Let's have a look at this in the front view. Yeah, we could have made it a little bigger. Let's first make it editable. I'm going to keep a backup copy of this. So this is the pillar top. Let's drag it into our backup folder. And I'm going to make this one editable. And I'm going to center the axis, put it at the top here. And then I'm just going to scale it a little bit back to about 117. Scale this up a little bit further and then just change the size, and let's do 20 for the height. Okay, and let's go to one of the component modes, and we can use close polygon hole to close off the top and bottom. And we're getting a bit of a weird shading here, but I don't really want to bring down the Phong angle because we have these round parts here and they're going to look faceted. So what I'll do instead is I'll loop select the edges here and up here and just break the Phong shading, and that takes care of that problem. And I guess we could maybe get rid of some of these edges because it does seem a little high res. And let's just select these edges on the corners and even out the geometry using the HB even distribution script. Okay, and that looks good. Now let's switch that side roof back on again. There's one more thing I want to do. Let's go to model mode, and I'm going to move the object axis. Let's just solo this object. I'm going to move the object axis to this point here, this top corner. And I'm going to snap the object to here, and then I'll use axis center to move the axis to the top and to the center again, like so. Okay, and I think that looks good. Next I'm going to do the bottom of the pillar, and for this we can use a rectangle again as a starting point. Let's go ahead and move this over to about here and scale it down. Let's do something like this maybe. And I'll use even numbers for this one as well. So let's do 140 by 140. And let's move it or change the plane to XZ. And let's put it on the floor. And we need our pillar base profile. And on this one we don't really have any round areas. So what we can do with this one is move the object axis to this bottom point here, and then snap that spline to the corner of our path spline. And again, for now I'm going to move the object axis to here and snap the spline to the corner, and then I can scale it. So let's do something like this. I guess we could scale it down a little bit further. Okay, and then I'm going to move the object axis back to this bottom point and snap the spline back to the corner. And I'm also going to move it over and snap it to here. Okay, so let's put this in a sweep object and add the rectangle. This is the pillar base. I'm going to change the Phong angle to 33. And let's have another look at this. Okay, this does look fine, I think. So let's make a backup copy and convert this to real geometry. And I'm going to close off the top and the bottom again, like I did before. And I'm going to loop select the edges here and break the Phong shading. Now on this one, I'm going to put the axis to the center and all the way to the bottom. And we also need to line these two pieces up. And in order to do that, I'm going to make the base a child of the top, use reset position, scale and rotation, and drag it back out and just move it to the floor. And for some reason the size has changed a bit. No idea why. We can set this back to something even, and let's do Let's do 20 for the height. Okay. So now that we've got these two pieces, we can create the pillar in between, and that's our last profile spline here. Let's go ahead and check out the spline. Let's keep this as it is. I was just thinking I could make this a round area, but let's just keep it as it is. And I'll start subdividing the points like I did for the other splines. And I'll do 9 points here. And let's see. I'll do 9 for this one as well. We can always remove edges later on. And down here, same thing, subdivide. And as a general rule, you can get away with fewer points on concave curves, but this is a convex one, it goes outward. And on those curves, we usually need more geometry to make them look nice and round. Okay, so that's all we need here. I'm going to select all the points, set them to hard interpolation, and then I'm going to quick extrude the bottom point over. And I'll do the same thing with the top point. Now, because this is the end of the spline, I can't really extrude it. Something weird is going to happen. So with the point selected, I'm going to reverse the sequence, and I should be able to quick extrude this over. Let's close that spline, move that point over a little bit further, and I'm going to extrude the object. And let's make that editable and even out the geometry as before. Okay, and that's it. Select all the edges, and I'm going to deselect these two. Use mesh commands, edge to spline. Let's get rid of this object here. And on our final spline, I'm going to move the object axis over to this point here, and then I'm going to take that spline and snap it to the midpoint on this edge here. And let's go to the front view. We also need to snap it to the midpoint here. There we go. Okay. And this line is a little bit too small. We need to scale this up. To about here. And we also need to move these points around a bit. Let's start with the ones at the bottom and move these to about here. And here at the top, it looks like we need to scale these points down a little bit. So I'm going to select these except maybe the top one, and I'll put the object axis to this point here and then scale this whole area down a bit. Let's do something like this. My shape is a little bit different than the one you see in the reference image, so we could try and scale this down a little bit further. Yeah, actually, I don't want to do this. Let's keep it like this. I mean, if you want to, you could create a spline that is closer to what we have in the reference image here. Let's just go back and I'll delete these points here, and I'll just move these ones up to about here. So something like this, and we could extrude a point like so, snap it to here, so that is a little bit closer to what we have in the reference image. And I'm going to move these points over just a little bit further, something like this. Okay, and we can actually get rid of this bottom point. We don't need any geometry at the bottom and at the top of the pillar, and in this case we're going to create quite a few polygons, so I do want to make sure that I get rid of these polygons at the top and at the bottom. So let's go ahead and put this in a lathe object, and that's looking pretty good. Let's try and bring the Phong angle down a little bit. And I think 24 rotation segments is the, or subdivisions, is the default. And I guess we can stick with that. Let's check the side view here. And I think that looks fine. Maybe I'll grab these top points here and move them out a little bit further. And I'm going to keep this as a parametric object and rename it to pillar. Let's also rename the spline to pillar. And because the base has the object axis right on the floor, I'm going to hold down Alt and create a null object. So this will be our pillar components. Actually, it's going to be pillar 1 components. And I'm going to drag everything else in there, the pillar and the pillar top. And let's just check the perspective view again, and also the side view or the front view. Okay, everything seems to be fine. Let's go ahead and create an instance, and I'm going to move this over and line it up with the reference image, and let's create another instance and move this over to here. And in this area here, we do have the same pillar, but we also have this square pillar at the back here. And we also have a base and a top that extend beyond that round pillar and go all the way back into that wall. That's why I renamed this to pillar 1. We're going to create a pillar 2, and for that we need, actually we can just create a copy of this, And this is pillar 2 components. And I'll move this back and line it up with this pillar here. And as for the top and the base, I'm going to make a cut straight down, and I'm going to delete the points at the back and select all of these ones, and I'll move them back into the wall. Just checking if these objects are lined up, because it looked like they weren't, but they actually were. And we need to move these points back a little bit further here. Okay, something like this. And that is looking good. Now we also need this square pillar, and for that I'm going to use a cube. And I'm going to snap it to the midpoint on this pillar here. And I'm going to scale it up a little bit. And let's go to our left view. And let's see if I can snap this to one of the edges. Doesn't look like I can, but maybe if I switch on snapping, yeah, that helps. Okay, so that's good. Let's go ahead and make this editable. And I'm going to move these bottom points down and snap them to the top of the base. And I'm also going to scale these down, switch off snapping to about here. Let's do 118. And here at the top, I'm going to move these points up a little bit and snap them to the bottom of the top part, which I think is this edge here. Yeah. And let's go ahead and scale these points down to, let's make sure they sit on the bottom of this top part here. So I'll make these a little bit smaller than they are in the reference image. And we could do 100. Okay, and that looks good. And let's select the points here at the front, and I'll move these back to maybe about here. Let's see. Let's move these back a little bit further. Actually, we can line them up with the reference image, because why not? So let's move them to about here, and let's make sure that these points here go back a little bit further and also penetrate the wall, like so. Okay, so that is looking good. And we also need some pillars here. And for those we can use an instance or a copy of the pillar 1 instance. And let's move this over and line it up with a reference image. So we need to move this to about here and in the side view, we need to move this over to about here. And there's actually two of these pillars, so I'll make another copy of this instance and move it over. And it's right next to the first one. Let's give it a little bit of distance maybe. Okay, so that's looking good. What I don't like is that these top areas are overlapping the support, and I think it might look a little bit better if we do it the other way around. So what I'll do is I'll go to my center structure null object, and we need to find the front wall ceiling support. Let's go to edge mode and ring select the edges here and connect them. And I'll delete the back of the object. And let's go to the front view, select these points here, and I'll move them over and make the bottom about flush with the top of the pillars. And I'm wondering, are these sitting on top here? Not quite. So it looks like we also need to move these points down a little bit, and we need to move down all of these. Let's just eyeball that. So we need to move them to here, I think. So that looks good. Let's go to the left view and move these points over. And again, I'll make them flush with this front of the top of the pillars here. Okay, let's do a quick render here. So I think that looks nice. Let's go to model mode, and it looks like we need to move the object axis of that support over to 0 on the z-axis. And then we can use a symmetry object and change the mirror plane to XY. I'll make this editable and remove that null object, and on this one I'm going to get rid of the edges at the center here by dissolving them. Okay, looking good. And now we can start copying those pillars around, and we also need to mirror the side roof over to the other side, and we need to use different symmetry objects to do that. Now, as for the side roof, I'm just going to put this in a symmetry object, move the axis of the symmetry object to 0, and that will give us our copy on the other side. Let's go ahead and rename the symmetry object. And as for these pillars, we can just group all of these and move the object axis of that null object to 0 on all 3 axes. So these are the pillars. Let's go ahead and put that in a symmetry and use a second symmetry object, change the mirror plane, rename the symmetry objects, and that's basically it. I think we're finished here. And in between recordings, I had a look at this model and I thought that maybe I want to rotate those gates around. So I'm going to, I think we need to select this object here, and I'll just rotate this 180 degrees. Because I thought these pins looked better on the inside than on the outside. And as far as these ornamental things are concerned, we could also add some caps if we wanted to. But of course it depends a little bit, you know, it does create a lot more geometry, and if you do a render of the entire object, that will not really be seen, but you can if you want to. And I'll just do that. Let's try and find these. We need the gate, and I think it's not these ones. Gate frame parts, the door parts. It's the door parts. And it's the swirls. There we go. And we need to grab both of these sweep objects and switch on fillet caps, and also use constrain. And let's bring this down to let's try 0.5 for both of these. And let's see how that looks. 0.5 is a bit much. Let's bring that down to 0.3 maybe. And I'll just change the caps to n-gons. Okay, and now we're done. Let's create another null object. And this is going to be our Roman arch. Let's put all of our objects in there. And we can get rid of this cube. Let's add a floor. And there we go. That is our nice and detailed Roman arch. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you again soon.